Studies. This fall, our featured graduate student is Oaxacan art historian Gilda Posada. Ms. Posada's work on the Florentine Codex, her interest in illuminating indigenous knowledge within these pre-contact documents, creates a full circle this semester. We began with the colonial impact of the doctrine of discovery, and we are ending this semester with a new reading of indigenous documents as knowledge holders. Please welcome Ms. Gilda Posada.
Thank you.
Are you comfortable?
Yeah.
Okay, or did you want to
maybe.
sit over here?
So I can see what I'm.
Yep.
Chicana from Southeast LA. Okay, awesome. And I just want to say, to begin with, thank you to Professor Rickard and Indigenous Studies at Cornell for having me and inviting me. And I know he's not here, but also I wanted to really thank Troy because a lot of what I've been working through has been building up from his last class that I took the last semester I was here. And Troy would always answer any and all questions, no matter how problematic or rough they were. So I'm really grateful for that. So I wanted to begin just generally, we're not like in the Southwest or in a campus that has Chicanic studies as a department. So I just kind of wanted to give you a brief overview before I jump into what I'm even going to talk about. So the Chicano movement began in the 1960s, and historians have accumulated like 4 different things that were happening across the country that brought about this Chicano movement. One of them was the UFW led by Cesar Chavez. The UFW, of course, was already started in California. The Filipino workers had become unionizing in the fields across the Central Valley and the Imperial Valley, and then Chicanos, Mexicans, Americans joined their movement, and with that they formed the United Farm Worker. And you probably know a little bit of that history. Cesar Chavez, kind of well known, Dolores Huerta, etc. So this was happening across California, more in the agricultural parts. And then you had Leyes Lopez Trijerina that was in Texas. He had come across land grants, right? And he really took them to heart. So he was studying law, and he was studying the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, came across the land grants, and they were basically occupying lands that were taken from Mexico in Texas, making citizens arrests, etc. And then in Colorado, you had Corky Gonzalez with the Crusade for Justice, who organized the conference, Huerpito Espiritual de Islam, came out of a gathering of artists, different youth from across the nation to talk about these issues. At the end, his whole thing was forming La Raza Unida Party in order to make a difference across the U.S. But the one thing that really tied all these together was when the East LA blowouts happened, or the walkouts, where students just took to the streets, protested how the schools were treating them. It was basically like you couldn't speak Spanish, they would hit you, right? They would make you wash your mouth with soap if you were speaking. Punishments like that were allowed. So they took to the streets, and this was one of the few times that the word Chicano actually begins to be used as an identity for unity of a people striving for social justice. Out of this movement, they put out a call for artists, right? The artists have a purpose in the Chicano movement, and it's to visualize and create culture for all the issues that are happening across the nation, right? We're using the banner of Chicano to unite all causes and unite all communities happening so we can have a larger impact. So you had Luis Valdez, for example, who really took the theater, worked with El Teatro Campesino. They would go out to the fields and try to get workers to unionize. So it was a way of taking art to the people and also making sure that workers weren't crossing the picket line. Out of that, the UFW begins El Malcriado. Andy Cermeño becomes their visual artist. And he really begins to use the UFW Huelga flag to symbolize Chicanos. Part of this is also Chicano artists are looking to their history, right? Because it's the first time that they're going back and reclaiming indigenous roots, right? Demanding that we have a right to be here because these are our homelands, our traditional homelands. Our ancestors had traveled here, right? We had a place, we were cut in half, right, by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Before that, the Spaniards. So they go back in history and they come across, the printmakers come across Jose Guadalupe Posada, where the calavera influences come from, Day of the Dead, that's all calaveras. A lot of it comes from Jose Guadalupe Posada. You've probably seen his prints and maybe don't even know it's him. If it's a calavera, most likely. He was a printmaker from Taller Gráfica Popular who made prints. They would be turned into ballads, spreading the news basically about the revolution. He would sell it for like a cent, and singers would buy them, and then they would travel town to town singing the news essentially of what's happening across Mexico. So Chicanos really, like, that hits home, that message. They want to use that strategy, right? Which is why printmaking becomes a symbol for them to be able to spread their message, right, for the people. It's a way to create many, you get your message across, right? Chicanos are printing these posters in the hundreds, thousands, whatever they can get their hands on, right? Cardboard, newsprint. If you had a shirt, they'd print it on it. They didn't care. They just wanted it out there. But they also begin to look at muralists, right? So the three muralists are Diego Rivera, who you probably know, married to Frida Kahlo, David Siqueiros, and Clemente Orozco. I don't have their photos in here, but essentially the tradition of muralism, Chicanos really take that on because these muralists were also looking at the pre-Columbian past in order to rebuild a nation back in Mexico in the 1910s, right? So Chicano Park, which is located in San Diego, comes about around the same time in the 1970s. This is more or less the history that's kind of written about Chicano art, or a lot of times the history that's written is about men, more through like an art historical lens, more so trying to validate it within that field, within the art field, rather than actually explore or complicate ideas of indigeneity, ideas of what being indigenous meant, the problems that came with that. That comes along with Chicanas. Specifically in the 1980s, Angie Chabram, who works at Davis, Chicana feminist, she writes an article, I am Chicana, and I throw punches for my race. I am Chicana, but I don't want to be a man. Where she's calling this out, right? She's calling out the machismo that has been embedded into the culture, into the movement. A lot of these men who are painting these murals have families at home, right? And they're just leaving them with the woman. They're telling the woman that they're too weak to climb scaffolding, etc. So in the 80s, Chicanas began to organize themselves, really empowered through what the writers are putting out, like Angie Chabram. You had Gloria Anzaldúa at the same time, calling for exploring mestizaje, right, and accepting the self, and really talking about that wound that colonialism left, the rupture, she calls it. It's a wound that never heals, it's always open. This is one of the first Chicana exhibition posters, 1976, is by Linda Lucero at Mills College, right? Very small exhibition, but I think this is like the first one that happens. Out of this exhibition, Chicanas really begin to organize themselves, Chicana artists in particular. And what we see in Chicana art is a different exploration than what we had seen in men, especially in terms of indigeneity. Previously, it was more a romanticization of the indigenous past. These are our homelands. A lot of critiques have been made to, like, example for this one, right? The big muscles, the European features, the man is big. There's other structure murals with the family where the man is the tallest and then the woman is after him and then the children, establishing nuclear families as well. But Chicanas really interrupt that idea, and they begin specifically to reclaim indigenous women who have been labeled as betrayers of their race. One is this one, which is La Malinche. She's something like a Pocahontas or like Sacagawea. You would know the stories that she falls in love with the colonizer, right? She has his baby. And then from that, the Mexican people are born. The first mestizo is made essentially from an Indian and a white Spaniard, and that becomes the mestizo. But in this one, we get a different story, right? Santa Barraza is really putting Hernán Cortés in the background, looking at La Malinche like he's a peeping Tom, essentially, a predator. And she's just in front of the maguey, right? With the indigenous ribbons across her hair as a cloth. And then in the background, we see the violence, right, that happened in colonization that the church imposed. Lynchings, right, the conquistadores, what they would do to indigenous peoples if they didn't convert. Another example is Alma Lopez. Alma Lopez is a queer Chicana artist. She's currently hired at UCLA. She's Gaspar de Alba's partner. They wrote Our Lady together. And they're really about putting out queer Chicana, indigena kind of imagery that really disrupts people's peace or comfort. Maybe that's a better word. Because they queer a lot of their images. So they have different series where like La Virgen de Guadalupe falls in love with like La Sirena, and people, like, it's a sacred symbol, so people really don't like that. But one thing that Alma Lopez does beautifully, I think, is that she begins to point out the violence that has been imposed on Chicanas, indigenous women, since contact, right? And she's bringing them together, not just to talk about the trauma and the colonial violence, but she's honoring them and reclaiming their bodies and their beings differently. So in this one we have, this is for a mural, a digital mural in the Strata Courts, which is in Boyle Heights. If you ever been there, it's basically like the Section 8 housing, public housing, where the majority of Chicanos lived at the time, still live today. And these are, the bottom row are actually residents that live there. And then in the background you have Dolores Huerta, and then Sor Juana de la Cruz, Adelita, and then Adelita, which was a revolutionary woman in the Mexican Revolution. And then you have Rigoberta Menchú. Do y'all know who any of those people are? No, I'll explain it. So Dolores Huerta was essentially Cesar Chavez's counterpart, right? A lot of times she goes unnoticed, but she was doing the same work that Cesar was doing out in the fields, and she had 11 children, all right? That's right, and she did it all. Sor Juana de la Cruz, I'll talk about her a little bit more. She was a nun that was queer, and she was also a poet. And then you have an Adelita, which the Mexican revolutionary woman who basically took arms and fought for her people when the revolution was going on, which was essentially a fight for land, right? Indigenous peoples in the South were fighting for their own land, which is still the case across the southern states of Mexico, where you have the Zapatistas uprisings. And Rigoberta Menchú, she won the Nobel Peace Prize for her book, I, Rigoberta Menchú. She's a Guatemalan woman who wrote a testimonial about her oppression from the Landinos in Guatemala. It's her story, but it's also her village, her family, her dad, who was an organizer and was prosecuted, right? And she ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize for the book, and it was like a huge controversy because some professor from, I think it was Vermont, went and investigated to see if it was true what she said, and he said it wasn't true, but it really questions basically that never happened to her. But it brings into question testimonial. Just because it didn't happen to you doesn't mean that the violence didn't happen in your community or it didn't happen to other people. So he was trying to discredit her, saying this is not true, like no one oppressed you kind of thing. You just want exposure. But in here we honor her, right? We honor these revolutionary women for who they are and what they've done. This is the Coyolxauhqui stone. The Coyolxauhqui stone was found in the bottom of Templo Mayor, which is in Mexico DF, in Mexico City, which is where the Nahua people settled. I'll talk about her story in a little bit. Essentially, she was dismembered by her brother in creation story, her brother Huitzililapochtli, because she rebelled against her mother, and essentially her brothers and her sisters wanted to kill him in the womb, and he came out striking, dismembered her, her body rolled to the floor, and then the rest of her went up to the sky and she became the moon. And the pieces of her represent the different phases the moon goes through. But Chicanas have begun to reclaim her as basically a punishment for rebellion, right? It's also where sacrifices would happen. Nawa and the Aztecs would sacrifice, basically. If you were sacrificed, you would roll down to the stone like she did in the story. So it was also like a taboo to be associated with her. So why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because this is where my interest really comes forward. La Virgen and Tonantzin. These are two figures that Chicanas really dive into and deal with in their work, and really use their imagery to create a new experience for Chicanas, or to begin reclaiming and relearning different indigenous practices. You know, the Virgin Mary, y'all familiar with that? Yeah. Maybe you're not as familiar with the Coatlicue stone. So, do you know the story of how she came to be? She's supposedly a miracle painted by God, right? Y'all know? No? Okay. So, prior to contact, the Tepeyac Hill was where the shrine of Coatlicue used to be, which is this sculpture right here. When the Spaniards came, right, they buried this one, but they really wanted to convert indigenous peoples. So this mestizo, Juan Diego, who actually exists in history, in their historical record, goes to the bishop and says that the Virgin Mary has appeared to him in the same place, right? Coatlicue used to be the mother of all gods, the mother of agriculture, in the same way that La Virgen is the mother of all creation, right? If you're Catholic, you believe that. So he goes back and forth 3 times, and he says, bring me proof. The last time he goes, the Virgen tells him, take these roses and wrap them in your cloak. When he opens the cloak and the bishop, it's her image printed on it. And that's basically the painting that's allegedly in the Basilica today, till this day, in Mexico. So she takes the place of the mother of Nahua people, of the earth, right? It's very convenient that it's very parallel. She comes in different iterations. She doesn't just look like the Coatlicue. The big one was unearthed from the Templo Mayor, but other sculptures that look like the smaller one are all across Mexico, all the way to the west, like Nayarit, and all the way down to Veracruz, in different pyramids. So she was definitely known all across. She was an important figure. What Chicanas begin to do is complicate ideas of La Virgen. During colonial times, La Virgen becomes the mother of the Americas, right? She's crowned. But what Chicanas do is they begin to insert Coatlicue, right? Reclaiming the female energies, right? Of not just the earth, but also agriculture, right? Of birthing and replicating life, for that matter. This is Yolanda Lopez. Yolanda Lopez is a Chicana artist in the Mission District. She's still alive, luckily. This piece is currently up in the Oakland Museum. If you're ever in California, the show is up till February. And the show also has Amalia Mestabanes and Celia Rodriguez in there. It's a big, in California if you're ever there. Back to the roses and La Virgen, right? Over the summer, I was taking a NAWA summer intensive. I'm still taking some classes like through Skype. This program really like beat me up to my core. We had a contemporary NAWA class, which is what's spoken today, but then we had a classical NAWA, which is what the colonial documents are written in. And this one in particular, I'm gonna read you because it really made something click for me. It's a census. It's like the most boring document if you're not looking for anything. It's like literally like so-and-so lives here, so-and-so lives here. But I'm still gonna read it because there's something weird in there. So I'll read it in Nawa and then translate it. This is from Pantli's house. Pantli, you'll see. The document is from 1529, so very early in contact, and it has to do with taking census in order for tribute. So Spaniards can calculate how much they will get from each person's land, because essential tribute was paid to the Nawa, basically, from different regions, right? In order for protection to happen, you would send like coffee or quetzal feathers or chocolate, whatever you had, whatever you grew, you would owe that to basically the empire so they can keep you safe, essentially. And when the Spaniards came, they just folded that over and transferred all the goods to the crown, right? So itoka Pantli, it's called Pantli. It could be the name of the guy or the name of the house, because they would name the whole house itself. Amo Makwatia, he is not baptized. Ikwahua itoka Tekpeyan, his wife is named Tekpeyan. Amo Motekia, she is not baptized. Ipil Omentlin, they have two daughters or kids. Se itoka Juan, one is named Juan. Ikwa itoka Tlaco, his wife is named Tlaco. Amo Mokequia, she is not baptized. Onka ita, her father exists, or it could also be he is her father. Itoka Yakokne, his name is Old Man Enemy, which is not really a name. That means they don't know his name, but he's not a friend of the crown. Amo Mokequia, he is not baptized. Ikwa itoka Toik, his wife's name is Toik. Amo Mokequia, she is not baptized. In Pantli Emil, it is Pantli's field. Kwashtuli, he has 15 different fields. I don't need to show you. Essentially, that meant that the way they measured 15 would be a lot. It's all you have to know. He has a lot, basically, to offer. Atlik keekli, but Pantli does not use it for tribute, or he does not contribute tribute. Sankishkwa Inksopia, he only dedicates himself to cultivating flowers. Chikomi Aktekwa Inkantli, there are 7 members. Omekli, they were divided. Inkantli, Omekli, Okantli, the members of one house are part of 2, meaning 2 families live in one house. That's what that's trying to say. Itli Pablo, Itli itoka Pablo. The ones whose house is there, his name is Pablo. So here we get a Spanish name, Pablo. That means that Pablo has been baptized. Omen inekwi se ikwish se siwa, they are 2, he has a wife. Se yakwi and oli ikwa itoka kapeo, he already came with his wife, meaning they already paid the tribute, right? So why am I reading this? The flowers. He uses it to grow flowers. Why is that? That answer is that prior to contact, flowers was one of the most sacred roles you could have in pre-Columbian society, growing flowers. Now it's believed that humans carry energy and energy life force inside them, which is called tonali, right? Tonali is the same force that allows for humans to procreate, right? Like we can get pregnant, we can give birth, well, women, right? But you can also give life to different things you make, right? You can make things, right? You cook, you make art, you make a weaving, you make a painting. You give those things life when you bring them into the world. So you give them your tonali when you do that, which is why they always say like your energy, you should be in a good place when you make something, because that energy transfers. Or you can lose your tonali if you're jealous or your ego, right? Or if someone gives you the evil eye, like those things mess up your tonali, which is where curanderas or healers come in, that do limpias. They are in charge of realigning your tonali. But one other thing that exists in the world that carries tonali is flowers, because plants have the ability to also create life and replicate life, right? Like pollen, right? So only those two things carry tonali. So if you ever feel off, you should go smell flowers. That's one thing we learned, because it brings back your tonali. Why am I talking about flowers? Back to this, right? Maybe not yet. So now a creation story, right? If you're familiar with the Aztecs, you know that there's the fifth sun. People of the sun, they're referred to as the Aztecs. Currently, they live in the fifth sun. There used to be four before that, four worlds that died and had to restart. In the last one, the gods had to sacrifice themselves in order for the sun to live on. And their solution was to create humans in order for sacrifices to be continuous and they didn't have to die and life can continue. Yeah? But it's not just humans, right? It's also flowers. So if you don't want to sacrifice, you make a flower offering. And that was pantli, right? That's why growing flowers was so important, which also meant that you were a traitor, right, to the Spanish. But what's interesting is that flowers are the symbol of the miracle of truth, the existence of La Virgen, right? That's what proves her. So Chicanas continue. This is one of the different iterations by Alma Lopez of La Virgen de Guadalupe. This one's called Our Lady. Instead of La Virgen, obviously, it's a different person. This is her friend Raquel. She's a queer woman. I think she had just gone through a sexual assault, and part of this was her reclaiming her body. But it's very different from La Virgen. You see that in the background, the cloak is actually the Koyoshowski stone, which Alma Lopez embeds in it. And then the background, the pink background, is actually the Coatlicue, the big sculpture. It's the side of her face that Alma Lopez brings forward. So again, we see like a layering of violence that has happened, and then there's a reclamation. But then I also want to talk about the conflation of time and joining Chicanas together, right? Because time as a linear concept, right, is very Western. but before contact, right, indigenous communities believed that time was circular, right? And you can interact with different worlds and different energies in the world through that. And then this is just like a slight obsession that Chicanos, right, continue, even like in Mexico, people continue to sell flowers and grow flowers, cultivate flowers as like something important that I've never fully understood, but there, you always make an offering to La Virgen. If you see her, you take her roses, right? You see vendors on the street, right? So there's this idea that you still take flowers. So this idea of offering tonali to the mother, right? That still lives on. And I think I know it's something that has been practiced and continues to be practiced. And it's being subtly highlighted. I don't even know if Chicanos realize it. But it's something that's joining a lot of their work. This is La Virgen Las Calles. Esther Hernandez is like a conceptual depiction of La Virgen with her green rebozo, but then the USA flag, right? The red cloak, that's what that becomes. I talk about flowers mostly because I'm obsessed with herbs. This is Amalia Mesa Baines. She's also a Chicana artist, came about in the 80s. This is the Braceros, Varios Botanicals. It's the series where this comes from. It's a whole series where she uses different herbs and plants to talk about different health issues that happen in her family. The Bracero program was started in 1942. Yeah, 1942. Sorry, 1492, 1942 always. Basically, it brought Mexican workers into the U.S. to pay them less than to pick agriculture, and then they would send them back on trains, so they were seasonal workers. The black and white is the photo of Braceros. Every time the train came in, they would spray them with DDT, Agent Orange, right, to make sure they were clean. Unsanitary conditions, right, which is why the UFW fought so hard. But a lot of Chicanos actually have families that were braceros that ended up staying and then stayed here and, planted roots. But Amalia conflates it with the Bernini, the Codex Bernini, which is a book of Aztec remedies, herbal remedies. If you're Chicana, Latina, when you have period cramps, they tell you to drink chamomile tea, manzanilla, like that's in there, right? How to heal ear infections from the burning of the newspaper, you know how we do that, mixing the oil, like that's in there. It was studied by Johns Hopkins, and they were like, "Oh my God, it's true," right? And I know Elena Viramontes is here, and her partner actually did some of these as well. But back to Amalia, she basically implants, right, the remedy onto the braceros. So again, we're talking about trauma, but we're talking about healing, right? I'll leave that one at that. I want to talk about Irenia more than anything because we're going to have one of her pieces hopefully in the spring, and I just wanted to know and go see it. This is a self-portrait of Irenia. Irenia identifies as a curandera, right? Someone that can cross spirit worlds, shaman, right? People call them shamans. But in Mesoamerica, specifically, like now, Maya, Lower Mexican, what we know as the states today, you have nahuales. Nahuales are basically animal shapeshifters that go with you and protect you when you're traveling across the spirit world. and hers is the jaguar, which is why she uses it a lot. And this is her just having a dialogue with it about her losing her mojo, essentially her tonali, meaning that she lost it along the way in a visit. But this one, Canción y Cura, is a curandera. She depicts the curandera as you would see it in the codex. The codices draw women, mujeres, with their two little horns in the hair, which is what Yerenia does here. And then she has the rula, the maguey. So it's a curandera, and then we have different birds and a butterfly. The Borgia, which I don't have in here, has the 13 realms of the upper worlds, and each one is a different bird, and one is a butterfly. So we have different realms represented in here as well. That's what she's pointing to. And in it is actually, what in their speech scrolls of the birds is actually a song. It's mapa, territory, imagination, and creation. The body reveals its own wisdom. Cherish, corazón, heart of the earth, mi tierra firme, cuerpo de mujer. This is my sacred ground. No one can desecrate it. Heal, 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 right? Curar, curar, curar. It's basically an ode or an honor to the curanderas. I'll leave it at that. But I think this is the one that's might be coming, which is Mujer de Mucha Enegua, Pati Chicana. Again, we see a conflation of time. Sor Juana de la Cruz lived in colonial times. I talked about her a little bit. This is the indigenous woman is actually Ramona from the EZLN. The EZLN, the Zapatista uprising that happened in Chiapas and Oaxaca. Comandante Ramona was the one basically in charge. Most people know Marcos, Subcomandante Marcos, but he was the sub-commander, right? Ramona was the one in charge. She passed away, but in her speech scroll, actually, no, she carries a child, yeah, and behind it she has the Polpolul, which is the Maya text, the Polpolul. They're saying like a codex document in their creation, how men came to be. Sor Juana de la Cruz, Inés. What Irenia does here is that she writes her poetry in Nahua and then she lowers it and writes it in Spanish. So in this moment, Sor Juana is speaking Nahua, and actually Sor Juana learned to speak Nahua. She taught herself how to do it back in her day. So it's also paying tribute to that. This one, Sor Juana has a portrait of Rosario Castellanos, who was a Mexican writer, who basically talked about gender oppression and really brought forward feminist theory and cultural studies with Mexican feminism, but also putting forward, right, the queerness that's in there, like not hiding that, because when people talk about Sor Juana, a lot of times that's not even mentioned. Alma Lopez and I think Gaspar de Alba recently did a photo series outing that, so check it out. And then you have the speech scrolls, so they're talking to each other, right? The sacred words. When you have two, it means you're talking to, and then the size of it would tell you what to pay attention to, but they're both equals, right? And then in the middle, we have the spiral, right? Of time uniting them. This is where the Polpolvuh quote is. And then in the bottom, we have the Tlali Yolo. So Yolo, so no Yolo would be my heart, but Tlali Yolo is the heart of the earth. So this is an ofrenda to the heart of the earth, which is to basically the Earth Mother. And then on the side, we have like these, like, what are those? These weird glyphs. Yerenia actually, in yoga, when you do yoga, right, this is an instance that you might recognize, the mudras. But also Mayan glyphs have these a lot. Even though you might not be able to decipher them, they're there. And this piece in particular, in the tomb, if you look at his hands, he's gesturing towards the tree of life, if we see it in the middle. So Yerenia is basically bringing that forward, complicating our ideas of languages, our ideas of indigeneity, of our ideas of borders. And then I'll just finish with Celia. Celia is, I've been spending a lot of time with her. She's a Chicana artist in part of the 80s kind of Chicana movement. This is the one on the flyer. Celia she continues these ideas that Erenia is bringing forward, that many Chicanas are talking about, but she layers it and complicates it with materiality, right? Like what is this even? This is a God structure house that you would find in the mountains. Otomi people still do these as ofrendas. They leave offerings, flowers, papel picado, chickens, and inside of this one is mother corn, right? The actual sculpture is made of corn husk. And you can't see this too well in this photo, but there's little outfits for babies and baby shoes. Celia did this to highlight the detention centers and all the incarceration of Central American and indigenous, mostly indigenous migrants that are coming to the U.S. that are held up. Many of them don't speak Spanish because they're really coming from indigenous communities and migrating up here. This is an attempt. It's called Ofrenda Cihuatcoa. Cihuatcoa is the grandmother earth. This piece is about the movement of the earth, right? And trying to house those energies in there and bring them back together. But she put the kids in there because these are also people that are in movement, right, today. And even when we talk about, resources and what's happening to the earth, I think a lot of times, we think about first world kind of peoples, but what happens when peoples that are actually, living these realities where their water is being poisoned, taken away, where they can't access it, what about them? So this is her way of bringing that in there. And then there's different, there's chocolate in there, and different medicines that she also put in there. And on the outside of these were these paintings that she did with cutouts. And I didn't know what these cutouts were until very recently. They're a mate paper, papel picado, ya sin coco? Yeah, this is very bad. Papel picado is everywhere, right? In that movie. But it's mostly used for Day of the Dead. This is where papel picado actually comes from. Indigenous peoples would cut these papeles every time a ceremony would happen. So if you were gonna do a planting ceremony, right, if you're gonna plant corn, there's certain figurines that you have to cut. there's different energies that are channeled depending on the type of amate you use. And when you make the amate, you have to be like very particular about what tree you're cutting from. And the feet also symbolize innocence. If they have feet, it means that they were like a child. So like when you do a corn ceremony, you make offerings to a child and you leave it sweets in order for the small corn to grow okay. And then you change your offerings as it goes on. But that's what Celia's doing with her flags. This is the Southern Maguey. So again, she's still talking about herbs and medicine, but she's conflating it and putting these amate figurines to make an offering to them simultaneously on the same painting. And then this is the one that's on at Oakland Museum. That print we did, it's painted on printed on amate paper, and it uses the witness, the alelita, but then I turned into one of the alelitas, working with her in the studio, again, to conflate time and space, right? I'm talking about this, and it turns out I actually made it into one of them. But she went back and you can't really tell, but the bottom gray part is the cages, and there's little hands symbolizing the kids again that are in the detention centers. And all these figurines have little feet. So again, symbolizing the innocence. They're all children who have passed away. And I'll leave it at that. That's what I've been doing and exploring and trying to connect. And I only learned about these figurines because we had to do them for our corn planting ceremony in the NAWA program, which was really interesting because you can't stop. You have to do it for 12 hours straight. Yeah. All right. That's all.
We have some time for questions. What was the name of the last artist again?
This one, her name is Celia Rodriguez. Celia H. Rodriguez. She teaches at UC Santa Barbara, and her and Sheri Moraga have a center they just opened for Chicana Indigena thought for art and practice. Yeah. Las Maestras Center, yes.
Going back to the flowers, I'm wondering, if there's a difference, if you can talk about it, like different flowers, if they have, different, like powers and things about them, or is it just like all flowers?
Different ones all flowers have it, have tonali. For example, Day of the Dead, right, back to Coco. You see the marigolds, the Sempolsuchil. Those create an opening between the living and the dead, right? They smell it and they follow the smell, right? So that creates an opening between spirit, like that carries that power. Different roses also. This Cody's, the Aztec herbal one. It has a list of all the different xochitls, which are flowers. And some of them, they describe them, what they do. Like one will help you not vomit, not feel nauseous. But other ones, they're just in Nawa because the Spaniards couldn't decipher them. So it would just have the name in Nawa and sometimes Latin, it would say on there. But if you're interested in flowers, this would be something to look at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much. It's fantastic. I was just looking at a number of these images, especially with the Virgen de Guadalupe, how transgressive it was and how the artists, mujeres, suffered for it.
Yeah.
The one with Alma Lopez was actually dismounted from a museum because there was so much protests. Yolanda Lopez also was greatly criticized for I mean, it just went on and on and on, and they were just, so it's wonderful that they did this, but they also paid money for it.
Yeah. Alma Lopez has the book Our Lady, and it talks all about that violence. She would get death threats, right? She would just be visiting campuses and they would like threaten her and email her like, you better not show up here, we'll kill you. The museum actually censored her and took the piece down. And it's all because she was wearing a bikini of roses. And what's interesting is that the people leading it were the big evangelical Guadalupanos, which is kind of like a taboo topic to even say that, you know, her painting isn't real, or art historians, for example, analyzed it and they determined it wasn't real because there was like a sewn and the type of cloth. And the Mexican government has not let anyone touch it ever since art historians started bashing on it. But people are like real hardcore about La Virgen de Guadalupe. I mean, Yolanda Lopez had, she just put, you know, she put herself running. I don't have the piece on here. It was a triptych, one of her mom, and one of her grandma, and in the middle, you know, instead of La Virgen, it was then Yolanda's running, her mom is sewing, and the grandma is just sitting there because the grandma had passed away. But they actually shot the Galleria window because of that. Yeah. I mean, I don't even know what they would do to me. But with that note, we are bringing a few Chicana pieces to the Johnson in the spring as part of Elena Viramonte's symposium. So you should definitely inspired. Well, I've just been saying it's a big party for you. But Irenia will be part of it. So definitely look out for that.
I noticed in some of the later works you showed the place glyphs that learned about, and I wondered if that was a common motif, or if there are interpretations for those, and how they're being used.
For these?
Yeah.
The hand, or which ones?
The place glyphs, and I learned about like the hills.
The hills.
Yeah.
So the hills, that's how towns are represented in codices. So like if you live by a river, you'd see water in the bottom of the little hill. Michoacan, that just means like a flat place. So they're just different words in Nahua, essentially, like hill place, place with a lot of mountains. And if it's that, or like place with a lot of snakes, like they just put a snake on top. But in these in particular, I think they're just marking a space for Chicanas to exist together. I mean, the structure itself, like, it's kind of like a place glyph in itself, I would say, but don't quote me, because I need to ask Celia.
It was really exciting to see how your ideas have shifted, especially in terms of the inspiration and the knowledge that you gained from the Nahuatl course that you took and ongoing study. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of the intergenerational relationships amongst Chicana artists, especially those because you definitely start to see a really interesting shift, from the late 20th to the 21st century in terms of deepening relationships to indigeneity and tackling them in much more subtle and thoughtful ways. And I see an interesting kind of parallel in terms of how you're approaching this work, that you find that you're learning this language, and that in some ways is paralleling what contemporary artists are doing as well in terms of deepening knowledge, learning through multiple different channels. So are there any insights that you've been able to acquire in terms of what is this generational shift, and how are these artists, elders and emerging artists working together? Are there tensions? What is that relationship like?
I guess I'll go back. I'm like the Chicano basher. But what ended up happening was that Chicano men got into institutions because they had GI Bills. A lot of them had either gone to Korea or Vietnam, and that's how they entered the institution and got degrees. And then when the Fight for Ethnic Studies came about, they were the ones who were qualified for those positions, right? But when it ended up happening is that they stayed in those positions and they never made way for the next generation. They just ended up retiring. And these are conversations, like, I'm not just making up, like, I have them with different Chicanas all the time. There's not that many Chicana artists even tenured, right? Judy Baca was like one of the few. But Irenia just retired this semester. Judy Baca retired a while back. But there is a lot of men with MFAs who continue, right, to get hired, to get tenure, to do this. So what Chicanas did, a lot of them, like I said, stayed at home for whatever reasons. They didn't have the ability to go out and just like go to San Diego for 2 weeks and, forget about everything. So they really began to look for different communities. There was the Venceremos brigades that happened to Cuba. A lot of people went, Celia included in that. But what they did was that they continued to do those tours, but to Mexico. So Chicanas have had a lot of encuentros, for example, with the Zapatista women. And also with those relationships, they began engaging in ceremony, right? And they began to study with curanderas, to like become curanderas or whatever their role was, which is something that the men weren't doing because they were in the institution just, having gallery shows or whatever. So Chicanas really came back and created a lot of bridges with indigenous communities in North America, right? Depending on where they were. So Lakota is like one of the many. Celia's granddaughter is actually a Lakota registered member. Like it goes that deep that those relationships begin to form, which like help regain, like go back to the medicines, right? Go back into ceremony and really understand what indigenous practices are, right, and way of life, not just, you know, making a painting of it, but actually living with it. But with that, I think for them also comes the responsibility of our future generations, right? Like, what are we going to leave, and who are we going to leave it to? Who are the next people that we need to make responsible? Especially because a lot of Chicanas are, well, that generation's like on their way out, you know? Like Yolanda Lopez has cancer. And like they gave her like a year left, you know? Rene Yanes like just passed away, you know. RCAF is like favela, right? Montoya, Jose Montoya, like they're dying out. So part of my relationship with Celia has been like, we're not just making art, but you're actually gonna like understand this. We're gonna take you step by step. And actually her niece Amber is the one that helps her every day, all the time, since she's not living in the reservation. So Amber, these are the little chair. I didn't talk about this piece. This is her altar at Oakland Museum. And there's a little baby inside the foil blanket, representing detention center. But the baby is made of copal, like, and copal is, you burn it, right? And that opens the gate to the spirit world, to the dead. So that's all made of copal, the bundle. And then the Sempotsuchi, because Oakland Museum didn't want her to have anything alive, they dried out the flowers. So that's what the candle is under. All the flowers are on that base. And then the chair is a little kid's chair, and it has books and things for babies. And those are all of Amber's things when she was growing up that she picked out and put up in the altar. So I mean, it's not just like me, it's like she's, you know, she's really thinking like these are things you can do and responsibilities, and also, you know, different people have different roles, right? Just because they're children, like, doesn't mean they don't know things and shouldn't practice. But
thank you. This was really so great to hear and listen and learn from. And I want to ask about Frida Kahlo a little bit, not because I care about Frida Kahlo, but because a long time ago, Esther Hernandez told me that she thought it was really Chicanas and young Chicana artists who were responsible for reclaiming Frida Kahlo and for resurfacing her, and because, you know, they were looking for figures to study. So as you were showing all those images of the Virgin, I was thinking about the kind of interesting way, whether there is any parallel between like they resurface La Virgen, and then they also resurface Frida Kahlo, and so I'm wondering if you could find a similar kind of pattern of return, reimagine Kahlo.
Yeah. I mean, most Chicana, I know Esther, Irenia, they have portraits of Frida.
Early years,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
I think the Esther, she's sitting with Frida on a sandia or something like that. But I mean, the first Frida show happened at the Galeria de la Raza. And now, you know, now SF MoMA like wants to bring Frida, and it's like, Frida's been here. So I think Frida is reclaimed. I mean, Frida was, you know, a handicap, right? She was queer. So I think those things are like really highlighted in those works. But in it all, she was still like a painter, right? She like made badass things. And I also think that when we talk about Frida, like everyone talks about Diego Rivera. And they don't do that. Like they're not even interested in that in their paintings. I know Irenia just puts like the different kind of offering. It's like an offering to Frida more so than anything, like an ofrenda in the painting, and she, you know, puts all the things that Frida would use. Because also that's, Frida couldn't move, right? So everything she had was in her kind of surroundings. I mean, today Frida has just, that's.
The Chicana central role
Yeah.
has disappeared, like, in the Brooklyn show, there's no acknowledgement
Yeah.
that it was young Chicana artists who rediscovered her.
Yeah.
That work has been disappeared.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about the way in which plays this interesting
I mean,
and I wonder how parallel it is to their turning to other kinds of earlier images.
I think she's important because all the men are like looking to the Rivera, the Siqueiros, right? But Chicanos, that's why I think Sor Juana resurfaces a lot, because you're looking back in history and you're like, well, who's there? And it can't all just be men, right? And I think that's where Frida fills that gap a lot of times, because she's a painter, but she's also brown woman who's queer, who's living life differently, rebelling against the standards that Diego wants to put her to. She's not just at home, right? She's out there, and I think for Chicanas, like that rebellious, we're not just rebellious, by the way, but I think that fire in there really, I think that's what's being honored in those works.
Yeah, thank you, Gilda. It's so great to have this space for this conversation with Chicana artists. I'm wondering, so you talked about the Virgen de Guadalupe, you talked about La Malinche, Malintzin, and there's the third woman icon, La Llorona, the weeping woman. And I'm wondering if you can, and I was thinking about the healing and the plants, and I'm wondering if you could speak to maybe artwork around.
Alma Lopez has a series, La Llorona Falls in Love with Koyoshowski. It's a lot of works. That's one of them I can think of where she queers them, right, reclaims that not just as a weeping woman who did this bad thing and drowned her kids or is haunting everyone, but women who suffer, right, but are also there for each other, right, women who are hurting, but find their healing, right, and love, and that's one of the series. I know that Sherry Moraga writes plays. She wrote one on La Llorona, and Celia did all the set work and costumes for her pieces. I find that more in literature, I think, more than anything, and I think it might be the visual representation of a Llorona, a woman just crying, like, how do you do that? Why would you do that? You had that movie, La Llorona, did y'all see it? Don't watch it, it's very bad. But she's always depicted in this bad way. I know that Sandra Cisneros, right, Woman Hollering the Creek, La Llorona, comes forward in that. So she's also part of the reclamation, right? Malinche, Llorona, La Virgen, Koyoshowski, right? And there's many more, Sor Juana. But they're all doing it through this, specifically Chicanas, I think, is through this Chicana Red. That really comes forward, and Sherry Moraga's Chicana Scribe, her book, writing about reclaiming the Chicana woman, specifically women who are practicing and living through indigeneity, who society wants to see as a colonial kind of enemy.
Thank you, Gilda.
Yeah, thank you so much.